The steel beast sat motionless in the shadow of the hedgerow. Rain dripped from the long, tapered barrel of the 75mm cannon. Inside the turret, the air was thick, heavy with the smell of oil, sweat, and unwashed uniforms. Commander Ernst peered through the periscope, his eyes burning from lack of sleep. 400 yards away, the American column moved through the mist like a slow green snake. They had no idea what was waiting for them. Ernst whispered into the throat microphone, his voice barely a breath. Target, 12 o'clock. The lead Sherman. His gunner, brave young Carl, adjusted the traverse wheel. Millimeter by millimeter. The hydraulic traverse whined softly, a sound that usually signaled death. Target acquired, Carl said. The silence that followed lasted only a heartbeat, but it felt like a lifetime. Fire. The 70-ton machine bucked violently. A lance of flame split the foggy morning. Down the road, the lead American tank didn't just explode, it shattered. The turret of the Sherman was ripped from its hull, cartwheeling into the muddy ditch. Chaos erupted in the valley. Before the echoes of the first shot died away, I want to ask you a small favor. If you want to see more stories of history's most fearsome machines brought to life, please take a second to subscribe. It helps us keep these engines running. Now, back to the ambush. It was July 1944, Normandy, the lush green hell known as the Bocage. Here, the German army was bleeding out, retreating mile by bloody mile. But they still had teeth. And on this narrow sunken road, 5 men inside a Panther tank were about to show the world why this machine was feared above all others. Ernst watched the panic through his optics. The American tanks were scrambling, their tracks churning the mud, trying to find the source of the invisible fire. Inside the Panther, the world was a claustrophobic cage of noise and vibration. To the crew, this wasn't just a tank. It was a fortress. It was their home, and it was their coffin. In his diary, written just 2 nights before, Ernst had scribbled a few jagged lines by the light of a paraffin lamp. He wrote, "We are the iron ghosts of the hedgerows. The Americans have the sky. They have the numbers. But when we meet on the ground, steel against steel, they know they are already dead." The loader, a giant of a man named Hans, slammed another shell into the breach. The metallic clang rang through the hull. "Up!" Hans yelled. Ernst scanned the smoke. 2 more Shermans were trying to flank them, pushing through the thick vegetation on the left. They were trying to get a shot at the Panther's side armor, its only weakness. "Driver! Hard left! Pivot!" Ernst screamed. The engine roared. 700 horsepower of Maybach engine screamed in protest. The tracks bit into the earth, tearing up roots and stone. The massive tank spun, presenting its thick, sloped frontal armor to the enemy. It was a design masterpiece. The angled steel was meant to deflect incoming fire like water off a duck's back, and it was about to be tested. A shell from the second Sherman hammered into the Panther's front plate. The sound was deafening, like a giant sledgehammer striking a church bell. Sparks showered the inside of the vision blocks. Ernst's ears rang. He checked his crew. "Report! We're alive!" the driver shouted back, his voice trembling. The American shell had bounced off. It left nothing but a glowing gouge in the steel. The Panther was invincible from the front. "Carl, kill him," Ernst commanded. The gunner didn't hesitate. The second shot was just as precise as the first. The high-velocity shell punched through the American tank as if it were made of paper. It erupted in a pillar of black, oily smoke. Target destroyed. But the battle wasn't over. The radio crackled with static and panicked voices from other German units. The sky above began to buzz, a low, menacing drone that grew louder by the second. Jabos, fighter bombers, the one thing the Panthers' armor couldn't stop. "Driver, reverse, into the trees, now!" The tank lurched backward. Branches whipped against the hull. Ernst looked up through the hatch just as a P-47 Thunderbolt roared overhead, its wings laden with rockets. The ground shook as explosions walked a line toward them. Mud and shrapnel rained down on the steel roof. They sat in silence, the engine idling, waiting for the planes to pass. The heat inside the tank was rising. It smelled of burnt propellant and fear. Hans, the loader, leaned against the breech, gasping for air. "They never stop coming, do they?" Hans asked, wiping grime from his face. Ernst looked at him. "No, they don't." "How much fuel do we have?" "Enough for a fight, not enough for a retreat." That was the reality of the Panther. It was the deadliest cat on the battlefield. But it was starving. Later that evening, the rain returned. It turned the battlefield into a gray, blurred watercolor painting. Ernst opened his diary again. His hand shook slightly as the pen touched the paper. The machine is perfect. It is a predator, but a predator cannot hunt without blood, and we are running dry. I look at my men, and I see the end in their eyes. We are fighting for minutes, not days. The night brought no rest. They had to move. To stay in one place was to die. The engine grumbled to life, a low purr that vibrated through the soles of their boots. They moved through a shattered village. The skeletons of houses stood like broken teeth against the night sky. Suddenly, the driver slammed on the brakes. "Movement! Right side!" Ernst spun the periscope. In the gloom, a shape emerged. It wasn't a Sherman. It was a Pershing, the new American heavy tank. Bigger, stronger, a real threat. The two metal monsters faced each other across the ruined town square. It was a duel at point-blank range. "Gunner! Sabot round! Load it!" Ernst yelled. "Loaded!" But the turret rotation was too slow. The Panther's hydraulic drive struggled to bring the long gun to bear. The Pershing fired first. The shell struck the Panther's gun mantlet. The impact threw Ernst against the commander's cupola. Blood trickled down his forehead. The tank rocked violently on its suspension. Smoke filled the fighting compartment. "Hans! Karl! Status!" Silence. Then a cough. "Optics are smashed," Karl wheezed. "I can't see. Open the hatch. Use the manual sights." "It's suicide, sir." "Do it or we burn." Ernst kicked the hatch open. Cold night air rushed in, mixing with the acrid smoke. He pulled himself up, exposing his head to the night. Tracer bullets zipped past like angry hornets. He looked down the barrel. "Traverse right. Steady! Steady!" He was guiding the gunner by voice, shouting over the roar of battle. The Pershing was reloading. He could see the American loader frantically working in the distance. It was a race against time, a race against death. "Fire!" the Panther roared one last time. The muzzle flash blinded him for a second. When his vision cleared, the Pershing was burning. The shell had found the turret ring. Ernst dropped back inside, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. They were alive, but the tank was groaning. A red light flickered on the dashboard. The final drive. The transmission was failing. It was the Panther's curse, too heavy for its own gears. The engine whined, high and pitchy. Then a sickening crunch of metal on metal. The tank lurched and stopped dead. The tracks were locked. The deadliest machine in Normandy had just become a 14-ton paperweight. "Driver," Ernst asked softly. "It's gone, sir. The transmission is shredded. We can't move." The silence that followed was heavier than the shelling. They had survived the enemy, but they couldn't survive the engineering. Ernst looked at his men. They were exhausted, covered in soot, eyes wide and hollow. He knew what he had to do. Standard procedure. Destroy the equipment. Abandon the vehicle. "Get out," Ernst said. "Grab your personal weapons. We walk from here." One by one, they scrambled out of the hatches. Hans paused, patting the cold steel of the turret affectionately. "She was a good girl," he whispered. "She was," Ernst replied. He dropped a thermite grenade into the open hatch. They ran into the darkness of the tree line. Seconds later, a white-hot glow illuminated the fog behind them. The ammunition cooked off. The turret blew sky-high, a fiery funeral for the steel beast. Ernst didn't look back. In his pocket, the diary remained closed. There were no words left to write. By the next morning, the Americans would walk past the burning hulk. They would take photos. They would marvel at the thickness of the armor. But they would never know the men who breathed inside it. Archival records confirm that over 6,000 Panthers were built during the war. Historians and engineers agree it was a technological marvel, arguably the first main battle tank in history. It possessed a balance of firepower, armor, and mobility that set the standard for decades to come. Its 75mm KB/K 42 gun could penetrate almost any Allied tank from long range. However, U.S. Army reports from the era also highlight its fatal flaw: the reliability. More Panthers were lost to mechanical breakdowns and lack of fuel than were ever destroyed by enemy tanks. It was a masterpiece of engineering, rushed into production before it was ready. If you want more forgotten stories of real people who lived through WW, subscribe. This channel exists to bring their voices back. War creates heroes, but it also creates shadows. The Panther was one of the darkest shadows cast over Europe. A machine built to rule, that ultimately died not by the sword, but by its own weight.